Welcome to Trending in Education. This is Mike Palmer. I'm always happy when I have someone back on the show. It's been a little while since Kate Eberle Walker was with us. She's the CEO of Presence. We're going to be talking about the work she's doing, helping schools find resources to help with their special ed programs and teletherapy. We'll get into all that in a bit. But before we do any of that, Kate, welcome back to Trending in Ed.
Thanks, Mike. I was really looking forward to today. I always enjoy our conversation.
Yeah, and I believe you've earned a refrigerator magnet with 3 appearances, so I need to figure out the next level swag for return engagements.
That was the biggest question on my mind coming
Right.
into this is
Yeah.
what happens next?
What
What do I
happens
get next?
next? Someone was talking about, like, an SNL jacket, but I feel like that's 2 levels up. I feel like there's a level
Well,
next.
that could be like the five timer club,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
Yeah.
something like that. But for folks who may not remember you and may not know what Presence is doing, but can you catch folks up on who you are and then the work that you're doing at Presence?
Yes, I would love to. So at present, we work with school districts, largely with special education departments, to help them deliver all of the necessary services for kids with IEPs, kids who need to be evaluated for a disability or learning need. All of those services are, growing in need and shrinking in staff in a lot of areas of the country. So we come in with a fully remote online solution. We have a network of over 2,000 therapists, they're speech pathologists, school psychologists, occupational therapists, and social workers. And they all are part of our network. They work from home and we connect them with schools to provide services that way. And we've been doing this since 2009.
Right.
I joined the company in 2019, and it's been an incredible evolution as, really everything around online services and K-12 education has just so rapidly changed in the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was where I wanted to go next is, like, it does seem like you had a really interesting vantage point to the pandemic years and then coming out of the pandemic years where, knock on wood, we seem like we're starting to come out, but, when the pandemic hit and folks were in their homes,
Mhm.
teletherapy really took off, and then post-COVID, there was really a push to get people back into schools, but as I understand it, some of the work you're doing really stayed kinda present, mainly because there was so much demand, continued to be a really viable option for schools who many times didn't have any alternative.
Yeah, it definitely we went through some waves and some shifts through COVID for sure. I think the biggest one and, a big part of why it's stayed so steady for us since then is the awareness of teletherapy as a career option and the attractiveness of remote work became just kind of like much more nationally known by clinicians as, oh, this is a way that I could work not only to sustain myself through the pandemic closures, but then beyond. So I think back to that spring of 2020, the applications from therapists to come work for us just spiked way up off the charts. So that was kind of the first indicator that, we were in for some big shifts. And we've always tried to stay really focused on that as, our core mission is to create career opportunities that can be flexible and innovative for therapists who want to find ways to engage with children and work with children, but don't necessarily want to do it in a full time on site setting. So that was a big trend. Then there was an era when, schools were largely closed and everyone was trying to figure out how can we support these kids and help them make progress in this
Mhm.
setting. And, for a while, we really, our business itself shifted to doing a lot more training. So we were running these huge sessions during that era. We called it Teletherapy 101. And it was to train all of the on-site staff on, how to adapt, how to do their jobs through a screen instead of, sitting in the same room. That's when we started licensing our platform, which led to the creation of Kanga, our teletherapy platform for
Mhm.
schools and for private practitioners and agencies. But that's become, a new way for people to do the work beyond the presence network. So that
Yeah.
that was a big thing that, I don't know, it this idea that we talked about before the pandemic, but just the acceleration that we had and embracing it was really significant. And then it kind of led through once schools reopened, we did definitely experience a backlash or a reversion, I would say, or a real skepticism again of teletherapy because people had experienced it in some cases in a very rushed or imperfect way, right? There were a lot of school boards saying everything's got to come back to the classroom, nothing remote, nothing online.
Yeah.
So kind of get through that. But, here we are now. And I think, we're seeing that school programs have found their way to embracing hybrid
Yeah.
models
Yeah.
in a lot of areas, including ours. So
Yeah.
it was a bit of a roller coaster, but nice to, get through all of that and find that we've actually been able to innovate the way people are working.
Yeah. And be responsive. I was mentioning adaptive,
Mhm.
your adaptive quotient, your ability to kind of pivot and adjust. The fact that you've had to lead really through this tumultuous period, deal with all the transition. And the part that was interesting to me as I was thinking about it is that you're not just really K-12, your workforce and kind
Mhm.
of the intersection between a category of professionals who need to be used by K-12, but
Yep.
maybe are not always, that matching process, that alignment of workforce talent to need in a system. I hadn't really thought about the workforce dimension. Can you shape up a little more, the scope of the space that you're talking about, both within K-12 and then maybe digging in a little more into the types of professionals and what you've been learning there?
Yeah, yeah. It's so much about understanding the workforce for us. And I think you look at what's happened broadly in schools over the past few years, there are staffing shortages, hiring needs across pretty much every category, and special education comes up a lot at the top of these lists of
Mhm.
where the gaps are the highest. And that's for couple of really fundamental reasons. One is that this is a very sophisticated, highly educated workforce, right? It's not a quick career to access. You got to get a master's degree, in many cases, a PhD. This is not, a sort of quick path to go into. So there's a reality to, how long it can take to grow the workforce and
Mhm.
just, how many are going to be able to enter, that education path. So you've got limited numbers of people in these areas. And then you have the reality that it's very hard to work in these areas. It's mentally,
Yeah.
emotionally draining. It can feel physically, dangerous even at
Yeah.
times in extreme situations. And you've got people who really lived through all of that. And all of that got more heightened during the pandemic for sure.
Right.
Um, and so, you come through that and you had this workforce where you have a lot of people who, their education was dedicated to, building careers, serving these kids with high needs who really need them. They really want to do it, but everybody has their limits to, how they want to work, where and when.
Yeah.
And so we needed a solution that was going to be workforce first, I think. I mean, this is a
Right.
case where these needs are important. Everyone is trying to solve for this in school districts. And, when you have qualified professionals who really want to do the work, just don't necessarily want to come to the building every day. And,
Right.
and we have a platform that can enable them to do that really effectively. Well, why not? And I think as it's become more evident that it really does work to engage kids through a screen in this way.
Mhm.
There's a lot of ways through a platform that you can really set up an engaging and effective therapy session or a valid assessment, evaluation, whichever it is you're doing. Yeah, I think it started to create this way of keeping more professionals in this workforce focused on K-12, and that's really important. I mean, we have to do everything we can to keep people that have the expertise working with public schools.
Yeah, absolutely. It did remind me of some of the work I did at Kaplan, which was around like live online
Yeah. Yeah.
classes where, it does tie into a little bit of digital nomadism and, you could
Yep.
be traveling, you could be a little more remote in terms of where you live. You don't need to worry about the commute time. And then what's great is you can meet needs that otherwise wouldn't have been achievable if you had to drive and get around. One of the topics that I like to come back to periodically is rural education and
Mhm.
how remote locations, homeschool is on the upswing as well. And when
Yeah.
students are in need of, more focused IEPs, which might be a good area to get into
Mhm.
next, is more like on the student side, the types of needs that are surfacing and then how you can manage them through presence, what you've learned over the past,
Yep.
several years. How is that dynamic? How are you working with families and kind of what are you seeing on that side of the equation?
Yeah. So starting with the IEPs and servicing the IEPs, one thing that has really accelerated in the past few years is the incredible technology assistive devices that have been developed, incredible apps, whether to help, with a nonverbal child and helping them express themselves is one area where there's been incredible advancement in the apps and the tools that are out there. And so there's having a workforce that is nimble with tech, comfortable with tech, or I'd say even, excited about using new tech. That's huge because, when you can not only be working through a teletherapy platform, but be connecting to other forms of technology that are helping a child move or express themselves or engage. I mean, you just see incredible results. I was visiting one of our school district sites in Texas last month, and we were meeting with a student, a high school student who had been completely nonverbal when he first started working with our speech pathologist at age 14. And we met with his parents and heard their sort of perspective on watching the growth. He had gone from finding other ways to express himself using devices that really helped with that. But he went from that to actually starting to be able to say words. His mom told this incredible story of the first time that he said, "I love you, mom."
Mm,
And, how she as a parent had for so many years just thought that was never going to be a possibility to
yeah.
hear those words. The tech brings that along and it
Hmm.
sort of smooths that path of going from nonverbal to verbal. That's just one example. And so I
Yeah.
think when I look at the parent element of this, I think they want more. With more technology comes more engagement, more possibility, more possible solutions that, could turn out to be just the right thing for their child. So we actually just launched a new service. We're calling it VIA. It's our first direct to parent offering.
Cool.
We're doing neuropsych evaluation, behavioral evaluation. We're recognizing that while we do get to, have some parent engagement through our work with school district, there are also a lot of parents with questions about their children who don't necessarily qualify for evaluation or an IEP in a learning setting. It might be something that's not impacting the learning success of a child,
Mm,
but the parent still has questions. Everybody wants to understand their children better. We've been getting asked for help with this for years. And finally, we're in a place where, we felt like we had enough scale in our network of school psychologists to be able to do it,
yeah.
to be able to offer it as a service. So I'm really excited about this. I mean, I've personally been
Yeah.
a benefit of getting evaluation for one of my kids that led to identification of a speech need that we were then able to get the therapy we needed and get resolved. So
Yeah.
I think tech makes everything more accessible,
Yeah.
more affordable. In this part of the offering, we're able to get something to parents that right now the offline solutions for getting a neuropsych evaluation, especially in, cities, coasts, more urban areas, you could be talking about, spending 5,000 plus dollars and going on a wait list for six,
Right.
7, 8, 9 months. Whereas,
Yeah.
we're able to get it done in weeks instead of months. We're charging $2,000. We're really seeing that by leveraging the tech and leveraging a network, we can get access and affordability to parents in this area.
Yeah, that's amazing. We made it this far without talking about artificial intelligence, which is good on us. But I'm going to bring it up here, where I have heard folks talking about the new potential for personalization, for AI as assistive technology, and for AI to create the equivalent of an individualized study plan for every student, not
Mhm.
just special
Yep.
needs, because every kid does have unique challenges. How do you think about that? How do you think about where maybe there are ways in which you're further ahead because you've been tech enabled the whole way and you may be able to adopt some of what's emerging a little bit faster than folks who are still maybe old school in their
Mhm.
thinking. Where do you see this heading? How are you thinking about integrating AI and some of the new capabilities that are emerging?
We think about this a lot, of course. We are every day developing some new feature or function or tool that is driven by AI inside our platform. And we recognize pretty quickly having this group of thousands of therapists and they're clinical experts. They have a lot of experience and very strong opinions about what's needed and what's unique about, engaging with any given child. And there are certain areas of the clinical work where I'd say, I hear from our network just a very strong beliefs that things need to be individualized. Then there are areas that it's just work that they find tedious and frustrating and time consuming and it forces them to work longer hours than they want to. That's, really outside of needing clinical expertise. It's just there's a lot of coordination time,
Yeah,
documentation.
yeah,
Documentation is a big one. I mean, AI is it's just right down the lane. That's something where you can take what, if it would have taken 20, 25 minutes to write an IEP report and, through AI, you can get a head start on outlining that and filling it in. You've just got to do your finishing touches as a clinician. This saves real time.
yeah,
And in this field, by doing that, by saving time and reducing frustration with the tedious parts of the job. Now you've got someone who's in a better mindset. These are humans whose work is to engage with other humans through the screen. And so
right,
anything you can do to clear their mind and improve their mindset coming into that work, have them feel like they're really positioned to do their clinically best work. It's huge.
right.
So because of that, I think we can find ways to have a little more positive impact every day. That's how I think about it is
Hmm.
it's sort of a lot of seemingly small things that add up to something better to plan for a therapy session and to have, AI built into our library search functionality, right? So that, something that you used to have to kind of go through and pick your activities and your games and line them up. That's another area where you can make a clinician's time so much more effective by, running that for them and then giving them a starting point that they just have to tweak. A lot of that kind of work, I think, is really, really exciting.
Yeah. And then I'm wondering around trends in the space in general, like folks have become more aware, I think, of trauma and
Mm.
hopefully some destigmatization around mental health, although it always seems like there can be more progress made on that front. But from your vantage point, what have you seen just in terms of perception of needs
Mhm.
and hopefully the evolution of this and any thoughts on where things may be heading?
From our vantage point, there's greater and greater need for mental health supports for all students. This is the area of our work where we really step beyond special education and see a more universal need and there's a couple of areas that I'm watching closely. One is where we're focused on developing resources for staff, so all staff needs help, needs training and professional development on being able to handle and identify a mental health need. And the whole challenge in this area is that in a lot of places, in a lot of ways, we're still relying more than anything on like self
Yeah.
identification
Right.
of who needs help. And that's not gonna
Right.
catch everyone that needs the safety net.
Hmm.
Not everyone's gonna come forward. Not everyone's parents are gonna know enough to be able to request a service. So
Yeah.
we've gotta train staff and give them those supports so that they can feel more confident and able to proactively spot and identify needs. That's one big area. And then the other
Yeah.
area I'm really interested in, it's not one that we do directly, but we have partners and are always engaging in conversations about how we can align with others is those that are creating really great tier one resources for mental health, which again it's speaking to this same need of, I know that our counselors can only be helpful if the child who needs their help gets to them.
Yeah.
And for that to happen, we're relying on, really great constructs being in place in a school. And I think this is something that, that districts are investing in or looking for third party solutions to help with. And so, my feeling about that is the more we can align with those to be able to be ready with the counseling support for those who need it, I think that ultimately is the model that we all want to get to, where we can move beyond relying on kids or parents to sort of, raise their hand and say, I need help. Because I just worry a lot that we're going to miss some of the kids who really need it if we're requiring them to kind of take a step forward.
Yeah. Makes me think of the idea of scarcity versus abundance, where so much of this has been framed as a position of scarcity, which it still is. But you would imagine with more of the tools that you're
Mhm.
describing, digitally enabled, clinicians working from their homes, assisted by AI to remove low value work, you could imagine a world where there's an increasing amount of these services available and they're made available to people in a more transparent,
Mhm.
mobile app in their pocket kind of thing. Any thoughts on that? Could we ultimately kind of flip the model where we're actually beginning to provide enough of these services? Or my impression so far has been there's always been such a tremendous shortage
Yeah.
that we're really just trying to play catch up.
It's a bit of both. I do think that we need to increase the pipeline of talent coming into the education paths that lead to, becoming a speech pathologist, becoming an occupational therapist, school psychologist. We need more people
Yeah.
and we need to make those education paths more accessible and more affordable. And, and
Mhm.
I definitely spend important time thinking about that and engaging on, how can we be part of supporting it. But I do think that all of these things that we're doing with AI, with other technology to reduce the time that clinicians need to spend on, anything other than that engagement with students, I think it could mean that any individual therapist could impact more kids. And I think that can sound really scary to clinicians today who are like, okay, the last thing I need is a higher caseload like that,
Yeah.
I already have too heavy of a caseload. And that is true. But, if we can prove that what we can lighten in the caseload is the time not spent engaging
Yeah.
with the children, can we open up that time
Mm.
to where, you could add one more, five more, or 10 more. I mean, we'll see how far we can push it. This is that balance that you were talking about. There's a real human element to what we're doing here with a healthcare workforce
Right.
fundamentally. And,
Right.
you don't want to push it too far, but I really think of it as like if everyone could impact one more student that, I mean,
Right.
that magnified nationally would be significant. And then two, three, four, let's really try to use the technology that way.
Yeah, and it does also strike me as like this is a field that is future proof. The AIs are not going to replace the clinical time with clients. And if anything, we're going to be tuning up our sensitivity so that
Mhm.
people who maybe haven't been getting support ideally will get it. So, there is, I think, some upside scenarios around more that abundance framing where, like, what if we had more access to this? And also, to your point, what if we did more education of the workforce to say, if you're good at these types of things, here's a career path.
The interesting thing in education for these career paths is that there are actually a lot of steps along the way, right? Like before you become a speech language pathologist, you can become an assistant speech language pathologist, right? And
Yep.
that
Yep.
requires less education. The education piece is about time and cost, right? These degrees are very expensive and not everybody can go into these paths all, or commit to the whole path all at once or imagine that like, okay, I'm signing up for my bachelor's degree and a master's degree and a PhD to reach employability. We've seen this done in other sectors, like nursing is a really great example where you can sort of break down the degrees and show the points along the way where you could do this much and you could have this job and you can have immediate income generation and you can come back later and take the next step and the next step. And here it really starts with a classroom aide. I mean, we're working with aides, paraprofessionals in the building who are generally people that, you know, love education, love working with kids, want to have an impact and, aspire to have higher income as well and higher
Mhm.
education as well. And so I think that creating more pathways and working with degree programs, on affordability and accessibility, I think the combination of the two can really lead to a solution here. And I think so much of the future work in these areas is going to migrate to teletherapy because that's what the workforce wants.
Yeah.
I think then it really lends itself well to online degree programs, which have demonstrated that, they can be a way to make the education, more accessible and more scalable.
Yeah. It is always interesting in healthcare too, the way things do ladder up, the way you're
Hmm.
describing, and
Hmm.
then in some ways higher order things get pushed down
Yeah.
too. So like more junior folks start to learn, have access to education that kind of helps them sort of see a pathway that
Can see
otherwise they
it. There, I mean,
yeah.
there's this, it's very much like an apprenticeship model,
Yeah.
right? The way that the mentoring and the supervision really is happening, all the way up the career ladder. You get to really see the work that you'd be doing in the next step.
Yeah, yeah, and we made it this far without talking gender, but I do
Mhm.
think the fact that you are a woman CEO leading a majority female organization and
Yes.
your workforce is
Mhm.
majority female, I think you probably have some interesting perspective and insights. We'll include a link to your book, The Good Boss, which is talking about really more for men, how to lead
Mhm.
women and how to do so in a way that is culturally sensitive, I guess, or just,
Yeah.
human. But any perspective there, I always look to you for counsel and perspective when it comes to navigating that and really leading an organization through these challenging times. Any perspective to share there?
When I wrote The Good Boss, I really wrote it before coming into presence.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you say, it was a reflection on some of the bosses, most of the male bosses that I'd had and what can really make a difference for the
Mhm.
women who work for you. Now here I am 5+ years later, having led a deeply majority female organization. As you say, it's our employees, it's our clinical network, it's our school customers.
Yeah.
It was on a Zoom with one of our school clients earlier, and it was 8 boxes, 8 women, all very excited to see baby pictures of our client's new granddaughter, right? Some of these moments strike me like, wow, our working norms, the norms of our majority are, very, very female. I notice it at some moments and just it sort of strikes me how different an environment can be. And so, I continue to think that it's important to understand and reflect all of your stakeholders. And so that's something that I see in action now. But it also has me thinking a lot about, if I ever endeavor to write another book, I should really be reflective on what should you think about when, leading in whether it's a majority female environment or majority whatever, how do you think about all of your stakeholders, employees and otherwise, and their experiences and make sure that you don't kind of go. What I've learned is you don't want to be too majority anything. And, the more balanced you can make your teams and perspectives, the better. So it's been really, really interesting and just a nice experience for me and the team in general, I think, to have gotten to experience at this point in my career what it actually does feel like to be, in the majority gender and reflect on what it means.
Yeah. And if I heard you right, we're not ruling out a sequel at this point. So let's stay tuned. The Good Boss was great, but there's a lot of learnings to unpack over the last 6+ years. It's been
Yeah.
amazing having Kate here on the show. Any concluding thoughts, any takeaways for our listeners, Kate, as we wrap up?
I know a lot of your listeners are innovators in education. So, my last thought would be we all need to share the responsibility of really bringing tech into schools in the right way. And I appreciate that I got the chance to share how we're working with tech in our world, but I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention how important it is to just really think about the manifestation of technology in classrooms, in the buildings. How do we set up our education environments for the future to make sure that all of these things that we're building and developing outside of schools are actually able to be, actioned and effective inside the buildings too?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think sometimes people forget that technology can enable solutions on like psychological, social, emotional problems, not just
Hmm.
technical problems. And,
Yeah.
presence is really a great example of that. Kate, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Thanks, Mike. Good to talk to you.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, please subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.